Greetings, humans of the internet, and welcome once again to Bowtie Talks. I, of course, am your excellent host, Luke Johnson, coming to you as usual from an undisclosed location in Midwest USA with some more historical insights. And I figured that now that we are finally off the subject of calendars, it would be a good time to discuss travel history, because I love traveling. I really do. And I can think of no better place to start than the history of river traveling and canals. Because before the days of railroads, airplanes, and highways, people would travel by waterways, canals, and rivers, which carried with it its own set of problems. So please join me as I dive into the history of river travel. Pardon the pun. Actually, no, don't pardon the pun. I think it actually sounded pretty good. Now, of course, before the Europeans came to America, Native Americans traveled this country's waterways in canoes. Now, first, I would like to discuss the Missouri River. French trappers and explorers in pirogues, canoes, mackinaws, bateaux, and keelboats traveled the Missouri. And at this time, these types of boats were the only means of river transportation. When the first settlers arrived, the main routes of commerce and travel were still watercourses, hence why so many towns and cities like Kansas City were built along the river passages. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. In June of 1673, two Frenchmen named Louis Joliet and Jacques Marquette became the first documented Europeans to discover the Missouri River, which, according to their journals, was in full flood. They had ascended from Lake Huron to the Mississippi, where the two rivers met. He then wrote, "I never saw something more terrific," but of course he wrote it in French. And he also wrote, "A tangle of entire trees from the mouth of the Missouri with such impetuosity that no one could attempt to cross it without danger. The commotion was such that the water was made muddy by it, and could not clear itself." They recorded Pekatanui as the local name for the Missouri River. However, the party never explored the Missouri behind its mouth, nor did they linger in the area. Now, I would like to lay one common belief to rest, and that was that Lewis and Clark were the first to map the Missouri River. They were not. In 1795, two Welshmen named James Mackay and John Thomas Evans traveled up the Missouri River under the Spanish flag. Their instructions from the Spanish governor were similar to Jefferson's instructions to Meriwether Lewis. They would map their way upriver to the source and find the Pacific Ocean, collect specimens of new plants and animals, and make trade and security agreements with the Native American tribes they met along the way. Their expedition, however, was not successful, but they did bring back new geographical information about the part of the West which is now modern-day Nebraska. At the time, there were also rumors of Welsh Native Americans. I know it sounds ridiculous, but it is what it is. However, Evans found no trace of Welsh speakers among the natives he encountered, and he had traveled roughly 1,800 miles up the Missouri River and he produced a map showing the course of it. And the map was passed on by Thomas Jefferson and was later used by the Lewis and Clark expedition. And Evans remained in the service of the Spanish authorities. However, he died in New Orleans, Louisiana in May 1799. Jumping forward about 11 years, a new way was found to travel the river, and that was through ferry boats. One such woman to do this was a Missouri woman named Hannah Cole. In 1810, Hannah Cole and her 9 children had crossed the Missouri River and built a cabin on the site of Boonville, and so they became the first white settlers south of the Missouri River. A fort was built on the site of her house due to repeated trouble with Native Americans. Upon its completion, all white settlers south of the river moved into the fort. And in 1816, Hannah Cole's sons were granted a license to run a ferry on the river between Boonville and Franklin, Missouri. And at the same time, a man named B.W. Levens was also granted a license to keep a ferry across the river at Overton, Missouri. Levens charged 50 cents for a man and a horse, for either separately 25 cents for 4 horses and 4-wheeled wagons, $2, for 2 horses and 4-wheeled carriage, $1, for horned cattle, 4 cents each, and for cattle without horns, 2 cents each. And how were people getting up the rivers, you may ask? Well, there were multiple types of boats. Now, as previously mentioned, a pirogue was a small type of canoe. The canoe was also the most commonly typed use of boat and was the simplest of all river crafts. Now, a mackinaw is a flatboat pointed at both ends from anywhere 40 to 50 feet long. It usually had a crew of 5 men, 1 man to steer and 4 men to do the paddling. Now, a bull boat was usually used on shallow streams because of its light draft. It was made of buffalo bull hide sewn together and stretched over a frame of poles and needed 2 men to handle it. And before the era of steam, the best way to travel through a river was considered the keelboat. It was from 60 to 70 feet long with the keel running from bow to stern, front to back. It could carry larger cargo than any other boat mentioned. And it was usually propelled through poles. Several men at a time pushed long poles into the riverbed and literally pushed the boat upstream. In deep, fast, or rough water, or if other problems caused poling not to work well, the key boat was then propelled by means of a cordel. What's a cordel, you ask? Well, it was a line practically 1,000 feet long, one end of which was fastened to the top of the 30-foot mast in the center of the boat. It was well braced from the mast, and the rope extended to the shore. At the shore, the end of the line, some 20 or 30 men would walk along the river and pull the boat upstream. Cordelling was extremely difficult and exhausting work, I'm sure, as you can imagine, especially when the edge of the river was full of brush or the banks were so soft that they gave way underfoot. Sails were used at the times when the wind was right, when oftentimes it wasn't. And before we get to steamboats, I thought it would be a good time to discuss the history of Mississippi River travel, as the Mississippi River is often seen as just as, if not more important than the Missouri. Interestingly, the Mississippi River gets its name from the Ojibwa word meaning father of waters, or big river, depending on how it's translated. The Mississippi River was seen as a major place for Native Americans. Many Native American settlements sprang up along the Mississippi. The Native Americans used the river as a communications and trade route. Between 1800 and 1400 AD, the Mississippian culture tribes thrived. They lived in big cities that had houses and temples. The most important buildings, such as the leaders' homes and the temples, were built on big earth mounds. The most important part of the city was surrounded by a stockade, sort of similar to city halls we have today. The first European to travel the Mississippi was a Spaniard named Hernando de Soto. He arrived at the Mississippi near Memphis, Tennessee in 1541, looking for gold. And more than 100 years later, in 1673, Father Jacques Marquette and Louis Joliet, again, the guys from before, paddled birch bark canoes all the way from Lake Michigan to the Arkansas River and back. And they were looking for the Pacific Ocean. They figured out the Mississippi flowed to the Gulf of Mexico, and they discovered a great transportation route, but they were disappointed because they were looking for another route. And in 1682, a French explorer named Robert La Salle canoed down the Mississippi from the Illinois River to the Gulf of Mexico, and he claimed all the land that the Mississippi drained for France, and he named it Louisiana. He wanted to use the river as a fur trading route, and soon there were many different types of people who lived along the river, including Spanish and French fur traders, and miners came, and missionaries who were trying to convert people. They lived in frontier outposts or missions. By the late 1700s, New Orleans had become a major trading center. Farmers and traders who lived along the river built flatboats and floated down the river to New Orleans to sell their cotton or other products. They sold their boats for firewood and walked or rode their horses all the way home. They had to follow the Native American trails. Both the river and the trails were full of thieves, so life along the river was dangerous, and probably even more dangerous in the river. You had to deal with snags and such. More about those later. And the Mississippi River was notoriously difficult to navigate. Full of rapids, islands, shifting sandbars, fallen trees, and shallow stretches. And the call of Mark Twain, meaning safe water, became a hallowed phrase. And of course, Samuel Clemens would later use that as his pen name. But I digress. Back to the boats. The age of steam brought new prosperity for the river because it made it much easier to travel by riverboat. With steamboats, you did not have to worry so much about sandbars and currents. However, tree snags were still a major problem. Now, inventor Robert Fulton created the first steamboat to travel down the Mississippi River. He named it New Orleans. She departed from Pittsburgh for New Orleans via the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, arriving in January 1812. Compared to flatboats and keelboats, steamboats could travel an average of 50 miles per day during the 1810s and 100 miles a day during the 1820s, due to their form allowing nimble navigation and power. These steamboats were narrow and had a shallow flat bottom, requiring a mere 3 feet of water to float, which of course meant that a flat-bottom boat could travel in 6 feet of water at a time. Now, as the name steamboat probably already suggests, their power came from wheels that were powered by high-pressure steam engines. Because of their swiftness and capacity to move substantial amounts of cargo and people quickly, steamboats rapidly became a popular means of transportation. And in 1814, New Orleans, Louisiana recorded 21 steamboat arrivals, while in 1846 the city recorded over 2,000 steamboat arrivals, and it was the fourth busiest commercial port in the world. The increased use of steamboats led to many developments along the river. Steamboats provided much easier and affordable movement for people. Several historians attribute the rapid growth of communities along the river to steamboats because it made travel to western territories easier. Beyond moving and resettling in new places, steamboats made personal travel easier as well. Three types of steamboat services were offered. The transient was a freelance operation with no fixed schedule. This was often the cheapest for passengers. The packet and line services made regularly scheduled trips, departing and arriving at specific dates and times. Passenger fare was based on whether travel was upriver or downriver, as well as ticket type. Steamboats also created new job opportunities. Depending on the size of the steamboat, it could require anywhere from 5 members of the crew to several dozen. The officers were typically white American men, with the crew being made up of immigrants, slaves, and freed people. These men kept the boilers running, loaded and unloaded cargo, cleaned the boat, and served the passengers. Some steamboats had restaurants and lounges with star chefs and orchestras aboard. On land, steamboats required operations management, construction, insurance, supplying, repairs, and refueling. Often steamboats were constructed along the Ohio River, and refueling stations were located along the river at various landings, bolstering riverport, city, and town economies. Steamboats also changed trade along the river. Before the invention of steamboats, farmers in the western United States did not have very many options to transport produce aside from floating it downriver on flatboats or keelboats, which were, as you can imagine, small and slow. With the advent of steam, however, it was possible to transport fresh produce quickly, cheaply, and in large quantities. Rates for shipments continually changed based on the cargo offering, supply of tonnage, and the depth of the water. 450-ton steamboat could carry around 260 tons of goods, hundreds of bales of cotton, and roughly 100 passengers. And for ease, plantations were often located near steamboat landings. As the use of steamboat increased, so did the output of cotton. Between 1820 and 1860, Mississippi cotton production went from 20 million pounds to 535 million pounds, the most in the country. Beside cotton, livestock, flour, grain, pork, timber, corn, sugar, tobacco, and molasses were the main products transported downriver. In exchange, manufactured and processed items were brought upriver, such as glassware, soap, textiles, and candles. Some people found such value in steamboats that they bought one or invested in one to help facilitate the trade of goods. Steamboats also improved the means of communication for people in the western United States. They established a quick means of relaying information throughout the Mississippi Valley. Mail routes and contracts were established which operated on a regular schedule. Newspapers, letters, and other forms of communication were delivered along these routes. First steamboat on the Missouri River was on May 29, 1819. The trip of the Independence riverboat from St. Louis to Franklin, Missouri took 13 days. Captain John Nelson had charge of the steamboat. The day after the arrival of the Independence, a dinner was given by the citizens of Franklin in honor of the occasion. The trip of the Independence from St. Louis to Franklin was the beginning of steamboat. In 1838, the government began to clear the Missouri River of snags, and river travel became less hazardous. As steamboat trade increased, boat became bigger and fancier, changing from the appearance of a floating shack to a floating palace. The golden era of the Missouri River steamboat was between 1850 and 1860 and reached its highest prosperity in 1858. There were not less than 60 packet boats on the river, besides 30 to 40 transient boats called tramps, which came on the river from other streams and made 1 or 2 trips during the season. There were so many boats on the lower Missouri during this period, it was a common sight to see many as 5 or 6 lying at the Boonville Landing at the same time. These were prosperous days for the river towns. During the boating season, which continued from March to November, there was never a time when a boat wasn't visible. The Missouri River freezing solid, the river freezing made it impossible to travel by boat during the winter months. The Missouri River was also one of the most difficult to navigate because of its shifting channel, its swift currents, and its many bends, which, along with the many snags in it, made a continual menace to river traffic. No pilot approached a snag, especially at night, without fear and caution. The average life of a Missouri River steamboat was less than 5 years. There are other problems, such as fires, boiler explosions, and floods, as well as low water, that also made traveling by a steamboat hazardous. But that did not stop people from traveling by boat. Another period of prosperity were the years from 1866 to 1868, when many captains would make over $1,000 during their trips. And with that, folks, I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave you now, and I think we've learned a lot here today. We've learned that river travel was seen as an early form of highway travel, and that new forms of technology will create new jobs. With that, people, I would like to say farewell. Goodbye and God bless. And I would like to thank the people at Cooper County Historical Society.org, HMDB.org, MissouriRivers.com, Battlefields.org, and WTTW.com for the information used to make this podcast.